Carl Jung. Ignore science in favor of patients. Carl Jung really valued the experiences and testimonies of his patients deeply, using them as a primary source for understanding the psyche. He believed that subjective experience was fundamental to therapy and to the construction of his theories, such as the collective unconscious and archetypes. The problem is that, for modern science, which likes to prove things with tests and experiments, the evidence Jung used was not enough. Over-reliance on anecdotal evidence and clinical observation, the critique of the weak base. Imagine that you are trying to find out whether a new drug really works. To be sure, you can't just ask one or two people who took it if they felt better, right? You would need a much more rigorous study. That is exactly where the criticism of Jung lies. Jung and the stories we tell, anecdotal evidence. Imagine you're at the doctor's, and he tells you that a new medicine works really well because 5 patients reported feeling better after taking it. This is anecdotal evidence, personal accounts, individual stories. Jung, to develop his complex theories about archetypes, universal character types, such as the hero or the shadow, or the collective unconscious, a kind of memory shared by all humanity, often relied on observations of his patients in therapy. For example, a patient would repeatedly dream of a powerful mother figure. Jung would observe this, and over the course of several sessions with different patients, he would begin to see patterns and formulate the idea of a mother archetype. Studies of mythology and folklore. He saw that stories of heroes, gods, and monsters appeared in very different cultures around the world. This led him to believe that these universal patterns existed in the human mind. What are anecdotal evidence and clinical observation? Anecdotal evidence. These are reports based on isolated personal experiences, stories that someone tells about what happened to them or someone else. For example, my neighbor drank this tea and got over the flu. They are convincing in conversation, but they are not scientific proof. Clinical observation. In the context of psychology and medicine, this refers to the observations that a therapist or doctor makes about their patients during sessions or treatments. Jung, as a psychiatrist and psychotherapist, spent many hours with his patients, listening to their dreams, their associations, and their life stories. How did Jung use this? Jung was a brilliant and very insightful clinician. He built much of his theories on case studies from his clinical practice. He would take an in-depth look at the history of a single patient, or a small group of patients, their fantasies, their dreams, and the changes he observed over time. He would see patterns emerge from these observations. Dream analysis. Dreams were a rich source for Jung. He believed that they revealed the activity of the unconscious and were a gateway to archetypes and the collective unconscious. His own personal experiences. Jung was an explorer of his own psyche. He recorded his own dreams, fantasies, and inner processes in works such as the Red Book, and these experiences also informed his theories. Why is this approach seen as lacking in scientific validation? While valuable for generating ideas and hypotheses, i.e., thinking about how things might work, these approaches are not sufficient to prove that a theory is true or to validate it scientifically. Consider the reasons why: lack of generalizability. What happens to one or a few patients may not be true for the general population. Jung's experiences with his patients, many of whom were intellectuals or artists of their time, may not represent the diversity of the human psyche. Observer and patient. Bias therapist. Jung may unconsciously look for evidence that would confirm his theories. If he expected to see an archetype, he may interpret it even where it was not clearly present. Patient. Patients may want to please the therapist or may be influenced by the ideas the therapist presents, leading to responses that fit Jung's theories, but are not necessarily independent evidence. Lack of control group. In a scientific study, you usually compare a group that receives a treatment or a condition with a control group that does not receive it or receives something different. This helps isolate cause and effect. In Jung's clinical observations, there was no control group, inability to replicate. If I do an experiment, other scientists should be able to repeat it and get similar results. It is impossible to replicate a patient's unique experience or Jung's interpretation of a dream. Subjectivity. Dream and symbol interpretations are inherently subjective. What a dragon means to Jung may be different from what it means to another therapist, and there is no objective way to decide who is right. Where did Jung fall short of empirical science? Jung's work, while brilliant, did not pass through this filter of modern science. His evidence was more like the stories we tell of medicine, and not like the rigorous clinical studies. There were a number of people missing. He did not conduct studies with hundreds of patients with standardized results. The observations were more subjective. They were Jung's interpretation of what he saw and heard, and not something that could be easily measured or replicated by another researcher. Difficulty in testing. How would you do an experiment to prove the existence of the collective unconscious? It's much harder than testing whether a drug lowers blood pressure. Modern science and the search for robust evidence. Now, consider that the Brazilian Health Regulatory Agency, Anvisa, before approving a drug, requires rigorous clinical studies. They want to know how many people participated in the study. Not just 5, but hundreds or thousands. Was there a control group? Some people took the drug and others took a placebo, a fake pill, to see if the improvement was really because of the drug, and not just because people thought they would get better. Were the results measured objectively? They used exams, lab, tests, validated scales, and not just, I feel better. Was the study repeated by other scientists and the results were the same? This is crucial to science. The criticism here is not that Jung's observations were invalid per se, or that he was a poor therapist. On the contrary, his depth of analysis was remarkable. The point is that from the perspective of modern empirical science, the evidence he relied on was considered insufficient to give the seal of scientifically validated to his complex theories. His concepts have served as a rich source of inspiration and understanding for many, but for those seeking a rigorous empirical basis, Jung's reliance on anecdotal evidence is seen as a significant limitation. The point is that for empirical science, which seeks to validate theories with concrete, measurable, and replicable data, Jung's foundations were more of a diamond in the rough than a cut and certified diamond from a scientific perspective.
The Virtual Books Publishing team thanks for your visit. If you liked our channel, please subscribe and share.